Good evening. Welcome, everyone. I am Derek Wheeler-Smith, Director of King County Zero Youth Detention via Public Health. It's an honor and privilege to welcome you all to our conversation tonight. A conversation that's very personal for me, as I've lost childhood friends, loved ones, youth that I've worked closely with, and a year ago, lost my young cousin. March 17th actually would have been his 21st birthday. Rest in love, Donovan McDonald. Feel free, man, even in the chat box, just to drop names. It's important that we tell the names and the stories of the people who have been impacted by this disease of violence. Zero Youth Detention is a strategic plan to improve community safety and to work on the outcomes for families who are close to being involved with the system. It's really a focus of looking at how we can do the work, and was impacted really by activists and people in community, man, who really coalesced intentionally to go, what do we need to do to move away from this model of decarceration that we have been functioning and operating with?
Good evening, I'm Buki Gates, facilitator with Zero Youth Detention and a community servant. Tonight, we're here to acknowledge that racism is a public health issue and gun violence is a viral epidemic. And we invite you to join us in exploring what this means, what it look like, and create a clear vision and a path forward in defining a community safety and well-being plan that works for all in our community. We are approaching violence as a public health issue and are here to call us all to action to understand our roles in co-creating and upholding a safe, beloved community. But in order to do that, we have to start where we are and understand the challenges so that we are authentically advancing these solutions.
We know that the disease of racism precedes community violence, yet we're now grappling with reimagining systems that have been built around the commodification of Black and brown bodies. So we have to call out racism first in order to address community violence. There has been impacts for the Black community, the plundering of wealth, and Black folks being more severely punished and more frequently punished throughout history. This context is important because we fail to connect community violence to systemic racism. And that's a story that I think is as old as this country in terms of its design. And that is a story that has centered around Black and brown people. Violence is a public health crisis. And COVID-19 is an incredible pandemic that has caused a lot of challenges and issues. But COVID-19 is a pandemic that we have been dealing with in this country for a long time that has to be addressed. And in tonight's conversation, I really want to acknowledge that we're not going to be talking about the police. We believe that the police play a role in addressing crime, but we're talking about strategies that don't put the police in the center of the conversation around anti-violence. And we really want to be intentional about centering the community. And so we know that there are folks within our community who are going to need to be quarantined for their safety and the safety of the community. But communities that are confronting high rates of violence have to start with those high rates of violence that are in front of them. And the question is, how do we explore more humane ways to address harm and to maintain public safety in our communities? What are the solutions for folks who need to be quarantined? And how are those solutions actually rehabilitating, healing, and transformative? We have predictable mortality rates for Black and brown folks, and gun violence is the fastest way that our young people are dying. We want to address that reality, and we have a plan, and we want to talk to you tonight about our Go First strategy. There has to be a fundamental shift in how we respond to harm and how we address public safety, and we want to move in spaces that allows us to look at those who are directly impacted by this epidemic, and our hope really is to work alongside all of you. The surest path to prosperity really begins with peace and delivering well-being to our community. And if a community is well, it removes the need for a criminal legal system. Urban violence acts as a linchpin to poverty, locking the conditions of concentration of poverty, undermining the efforts to achieve the kind of social and economic progress. Teachers can't teach, schools can't educate when they're surrounded by violence. Doctors and hospitals can't treat whole neighborhoods suffering from trauma-induced anxiety, especially during a pandemic. Businesses aren't going to stay or hire in areas where murder is commonplace, and families can't prosper and thrive.
So we are calling all the village together. And while we don't have to agree on every topic, we do have to put community first at all times. Everybody can't do everything, but everybody can do something. We need the guides, the storytellers, the visionaries, the healers, the weavers, the agitators, the policymakers, the marchers, protesters, all so we can create a social change in an ecosystem. Tonight, our curated conversation today are intended to amplify multi-sector expertise and to highlight the visionary solutions that live in the work of our illustrious guests who are here to help us imagine a co-created and authentic community safety and well-being plan that we can successfully implement throughout our county together. Elders, Black women leaders, directly impacted people, culture keepers and community leaders, philanthropists and community developers. Each of the subject areas of our conversation are part of the system and institutions that impact the lives of our young people. We have been working for several months to align specific systems and city and county departments to help identify common goals and to eliminate barriers to working meaningfully with community to co-create a community safety and well-being plan. We have created a work group framework that will partner community leaders and system representatives to co-lead a 6 to 8 month planning and recommendation process. This now leads us into this new shore. So we thank y'all for joining us tonight. We're looking forward to this conversation. As we pull up this graphic, we understand that many of you today are visual learners. And in this graphic, we want you to really understand that where we were is no longer. Where we are is this roadmap, this place that we're really trying to lean in to help us establish this regional community safety and well-being plan. And what I want you to really focus on is really the North Star, or really the sun. The sun is where we are looking to cultivate conditions for young people to be happy, safe, healthy, and thriving. So Dee, let's talk about what we see in this visual and what this visual really means for this community safety and well-being plan.
Man, there's a lot going on in this image. You know, I think underneath kind of the ground there, you can kind of see the trees, and there's a level of intentionality going. How do we leverage a conversation that doesn't just uplift quantitative data, which is just about kind of the numbers, but how do we look at qualitative data? What's the quality of the story, right, that needs to be told? And we've got reports and have sat down with young people. And one of the things that came out of that from one young person was, man, it's easier for me to get a gun than it is for me to get a job. And so we really see kind of data itself and as looking at the forest, quantitative, and qualitative is really looking at the individual tree, but we got to talk about the roots of that tree, and that's the historical data. So you can see that there. I think it's powerful that it starts off with a Black woman who's pregnant in that picture. And we have to talk about the infant mortality rates, right? For Black children, there's just a hurdle for us to just get out of the birthing ward. It begins there, right? And so we want to be looking at the work that has to happen across a continuum. Like, what are the investments from 0 to 5, and who's doing work in those spaces from 5 to 12 and 12 to 18? And really beginning to look at this image to start to identify what's the path. I mean, I think you can look at it and you can kind of see cracks in the walkway, right? Because there's a web of support and there's a lot of work that has to be put in place in order to get us in the direction and on the path that leads towards this idea of community safety and well-being.
And even as you look at this, right, and we continue to see the bigger picture, as we begin to see the forest through the trees in itself, there's this roadmap that's taken us through these various pillars. Now, we're not set and sold on these pillars, but they've been ones that we identified based on the social determinants of health work that has been done to look at education, to look at workforce and economic development, to look at our health and human services or community development, to look at the safety within community, but also look at juvenile justice. But as you start to work through this path, we recognize that this is a new shore. But we also will be moving on to another new shore, because some of the things, the behaviors, beliefs, and the values that we have today may not be the same moving forward tomorrow. But it does give us a better sense of where we're at. And we have to keep in mind the common goal that we have is to prevent and eliminate youth gun violence by ensuring the sustainable conditions that allow young people to be healthy, hopeful, safe, and thriving.
Yeah, that's good stuff, man. Appreciate Lowe's just pulling that up. And, you know, I'm visual. What I love about visual imagery, right, is the way that it actually taps into that subconscious and allows us to begin to explore just through the power of imagery. So
for those that are watching, our viewers, we do ask that you use the chat features, use the chat box. Obviously, you're on Facebook Live. For those that are on YouTube, we definitely want to field questions that you may have. But I do want to get into this panel. I believe we have some illustrious guests, those with lived experience, those that will come and speak from their perspective. Now, I'm not saying that these are the experts, by no means. These aren't the sole saviors that we have in community, but they're individuals who bring something to the table. And hopefully, as you recognize, you understand that tonight's conversation is about shifting from this individual intelligence to a collective wisdom, to a collective thought that we all share together as we continue to move the continuum to allow our families and our communities to be safe, healthy, hopeful, and thriving. Our first panel is a panel that we're going to start off with our ancestors and our elders. So before that, I want to move us into a commercial, and then we'll go ahead and get set up for our elder panel. All right, welcome back. We're excited to now move into our next panel of our ancestors. So we all join me in welcoming Reverend Harriet Walden with the Silent War Campaign, as well as Delbert Richardson, Brother Booney. I hope Brother Booney is here with us. Yes, he is joining us with Unspoken Truths. Reverend Walden, it's good to see you. I call her Mother. Mother, it's good to see you.
Oh, thank you. Luke, it's good to see you too. How you doing tonight? How both of you all doing?
We're doing good. I know we just may have lost Booney. We'll get him moved in and out as he's available. Reverend Walden, I want to just start to talk about and share your historical impacts, or share the perspectives of the historical impacts of gun violence in our community.
Well, I started by saying that I grew up in a community where it was not a lot of violence. Okay, I grew up in segregation, and so all segregation was not the same. I grew up in Sanford, Florida, which was had an all-black township that was started by some of my families in the 1800s. And so I grew up singing "Lift Every Voice and Sing" every day, and all my teachers was African Americans. That was taught by the great Mary McLeod Methuen. So I grew up in a different era where violence was not nearly as prevalent as it is today. So as a result of living in Seattle, I probably experienced more violence here than I did growing up in segregation and that kind of stuff. So as a result of that, of course, everybody knows I'm the founder of Mothers Police Accountability. But back in 1999, Pat Ingram was a friend of mine, and she got murdered, her daughter and her granddaughter. And 2 weeks after that, another African American person, a young man killed his mom, his nephew, and a sharpshooter took him out. And it was 2 weeks in a row. It was 3 generations of Black people being funeralized, and the community was silent. The silence was so deafening, I couldn't stand it. I went by Pat Ingram's house every day because I didn't want to forget her. And so I started the Silent War Campaign, breaking the silence on Black crime and how we harm one another. And part of that campaign is that we have a survey. We surveyed over 1,500 people's ideas about violence. Most of the people, I still think that there's nothing that could be done about it. Dr. Joy Leary was here. We brought her here, and we got that survey right here. And also we had posters. We put posters out, Stop the Violence. All over the place. We put these posters out. We actually, we did work with the police because one of the things that we worked with the police was on Tyrone Love. Tyrone Love was a beloved friend of everybody in Seattle. You know, he walked the streets of Seattle going home at night, got killed in February 2009, and whoever took his life is still have not been apprehended. And what we've learned is that the police only saw, the social scientists said that Black people didn't care about crime in the community, and so it was never any resources put toward bringing people to justice. And so we fixed that. I mean, we forced them to find whoever had killed Pat Ingram. And on those days, victims of violent crimes didn't always get the help that they needed. Her family lost their home over there because the resources wasn't there for the community that they have today. And so the Silent War Campaign, we were posting every night. Do you know it's 10 o'clock at night? Do you know where your children are? You know, and if not, Why? You know, we believe that parents have to be more accountable. I mean, we really do. I mean, because I come from an old place, I believe that parents have to be a intricate part of their children's lives. And I believe that also we need a spiritual component. We can have all of this, but if we don't have a spiritual component, it's our spirituality that got our ancestors through.
So I want to get to that point. Hold on, Mother Walden, because I want to get Brother Booney in here. I believe we have him now to share some thoughts, but I do want to come back to that. So hold on to that spirituality aspect.
Okay.
Delbert, good to hear from you. Good to see you, brother. Hopefully you're with us. I want to just ask you to share with us your perspective on the historical impacts of gun violence here in our county. All right, look like we might be having some technical difficulties with Brother Booney. So
I want to, Reverend Walden, so honored to be in space with you and appreciate all that you have done and continue to do for our beloved community. One of the things you talked about was coming from a generation where, you know, there wasn't this experience of internal violence. And I think what I would love to hear from you, would love to hear you talk a little bit about is, what do you think it requires and takes for us to get back to that kind of a beloved community? And when you look at us right now as a community, where's the hurt? So where do you believe the hurt is? And then what does it look like for us to create and to become that beloved community that you so eloquently spoke about?
Well, the hurt is evidently in our young people. I mean, I could not go to school 12 years without having somebody who liked me in the classroom. I mean, integration has played a great part in our children being disaffected in schools. I mean, you know, you can go to school 12 years in the Seattle system and not have anybody to think that you're worthwhile and valuable. And I think that our children go to buildings where they're not absolutely, they don't have the shield and buckler on. I mean, the shield and buckler on is history. If our children went to first grade knowing who they were in history, they would have a much better results than what they do. I grew up with Black history being every day. And so I think that the educational system that we are living in an integrated society, that we send our kids in the building and they can go 12 years and not have a Black teacher. I mean, I think representation matters. You have to see somebody who look like you and somebody who believes in you, and that can be missing. And if the young people are not getting that reinforcement in their home, or they're not connected to a community center or to a church that reinforces that, then you know, they're like a tumbleweed. Somebody comes along and offer them something that they never had before. They think that that's the real deal when it's not the real deal.
So now let's talk about this. You mentioned a spirituality component to it, right? And obviously that's something that our culture has been rooted in spirituality. What does that mean to now? How do we bridge this gap or this divide that often is there when you look at this council of elders? And how do we begin to lean on the wisdom that comes from our elders and how we create and move on to this New Shore model that we presented today? So talk a little bit about that. What kind of wisdom, what advice can you give to the viewers
you know, one
tonight?
of the things that we did with the Silent War campaign, and we hope to do this again this fall, we offered it's called the Better Day Conference, and the Better Day Conference tells you that 8 generations ago, somebody in your lineage looked up to the sky. They knew they would never go home again. They knew they might not ever see their children again, but they prayed for a better day. And Buki and Jerome Gates showed up. Okay, you are that better day. And we had people. We asked people to write an essay on how you are the better day. And then we wanted to pair young children to be able to do their genealogy, so they could see that actually somebody prayed them up. They have been prayed up to be the better day that their ancestors did not have, and they're squandering that opportunity because no one has told them that you are the better day. Somebody prayed you up. They knew 8, 9 generations ago they would never go home again. They would never see their children, might not ever see their husband, but they knew a better day is coming. And look at you two there. You are absolutely the better day that your ancestors. And that's that spiritual piece that we bring in. We hook it around that conference and genealogy so young people can understand they did not give birth to themselves. And we're here today because somebody planted a tree by the side of the river, and we're the fruit of that tree. And that's where the strength is. The strength is not in everything that's been bad that's been done to us. The strength is that through all of that, we are the fruit of the tree that our ancestors planted. And look at you. Look at you all. Isn't that awesome? Isn't that awesome? See how good you feel? Hey, look at you all smiling up there. You know,
Thank you for
somebody
those
done
words of
praised you up.
affirmation, Mother Walden. I appreciate that.
We absolutely feel good. And there's something powerful about sitting in the space with your elders. And one of the things that Buki and I and the rest of the team were thinking about was, how do we bridge this divide between the elders, right, the young and old, as we're watching a generation of young people who are incredibly powerful in their advocacy and willing to take it to the streets relentlessly for this social justice move. And we're literally watching things transpire and happen. And we know that it always takes buildup before there's breakthrough. So while it seems like, right, like you came and kicked in the door, you got to acknowledge that there was a lot of buildup to get to that point, right? So I want to ask you, what do you believe that spiritual recovery, like, what does that look like for us with where we sit? Like, what is spiritual? Because that is one of the 9 interrelated dimensions for Black and brown people, and something that we hold dear and near, right, is this idea of spirituality. How do we get back to that, particularly in a space and in systems that don't necessarily value that, right? Because you can't count and measure spirit. So how do we do that? How do we get back to spiritual recovery?
Well, I think it's 3 movies you can get back to. One is Red Tails, what happened with the Tuskegee Airmen, okay? I mean, the other one is Hidden Figures. I grew up in Hidden Figures, segregation, and the excellence that came out of that. And the last one is Harriet Tubman. All right, she believed that she believed. I mean, she had an undying faith. She believed that she could go back down there every time. She believed that there was a guiding force, and also she had precognition. I mean, our people had to have some kind of psychic ability or something. They were listening to a voice that was talking to them. So now we have so much noise that nobody wants to listen. They're listening to all the other stuff. But there's a voice within us will always lead us right, because our GPS is our intuition. Our intuition it never went away. We went away from it. But we practice our intuition. It will let us when the voice tells you to turn right and you say I'm not, and you turn left, what you're gonna get? You're gonna get in trouble. Because that voice told you at the stoplight, turn right. Oh, I don't want to be. I'm going to go the way I want to go. But there's a voice for us, and we can call it by many names, but there's an anchor for us. And we have to teach our children and be able to give them the roadmap to let them know, number one, that they're never alone, that their ancestors, their grandmothers, their great-grandmothers is always watching over them. I mean, we've been programmed to believe that we're alone. We're not alone on this journey. How could we be alone? How we have thousands and millions of ancestors around us all the time. Their only job is to keep us safe, but we're not listening. And so how do we cultivate a voice of listening and knowing that we're not crazy, because we come from the mighty Africans, okay?
Yeah.
And they still mighty. I mean, Marcus Garvey was mighty. Marcus Garvey said, look for me in the whirlwind. When you call me, I will come, and I will bring legions of angels, spirits with me to help you fight for your liberation. Okay, and freedom and justice is what he said. Marcus Garvey. You got Frederick Douglass. You got Harriet Tubman. You got them right here in Seattle. Flo Ware. The people who've been on here for us. All these people, they didn't go anywhere. They just beyond view, waiting on us to tap them.
Well, that's just so important when you talk about this. And I think we alluded to that at the beginning of the show, these messengers that we need, right? Where everyone has something to contribute, but at the same time, everyone has something to learn. And we need those prophetic voices out there in the community that can continue to speak to those things that are in front of us, right? And so I think we have to continue to allow ourselves to be open and willing and to be continuous learners throughout this process and this journey. Mother Walden,
but I'm learning this technology. I'm learning this technology. It's like, oh, okay.
Well, we're here to help you too, right? That's what this generation X and Y and Z. We're here to help you. So, Mother Walden, I want to thank you for joining us. I know we're running up out of time, but again, the Silent War campaign, it's something that one can get involved with. We want to continue to encourage to lift up your voice. That is what Mother Walden is saying. That is what the Silent War campaign is. We have to rid ourselves of this disease of violence that continues to perpetuate itself in our community. So, Mother Walden, we thank you for joining us. We appreciate you being present. And we're going to go ahead and begin to transition into our next panel. Again, thank you so much, Mother Walden.
Thanks, Mother Walden.
Mhm.
So we're going to go ahead and continue and shift into our next panel. This next panel is a dynamic panel. One, because it's International Women's Month, but also want to make sure that we're putting something in place that really speaks to those Black women who are in this work leading. So we thank you. We're going to go ahead and move on to a break. So stand by for the Black Women Leading panel. Welcome back to Community Conversation here, the King County Public Health Zero Youth Detention, community safety and well-being, public impacts of gun violence, and how we begin to look at a well-being community. I want to just now bring on a host of the Morning Update show here with Converge Media, Trayana Holiday, who is also a bulldog. So we went to school together. So obviously there's a lot of love in this room. But now we're going to move into a Black women leading panel that will include Davita Briscoe, who is with the Black Women's Coalition. It includes Amijah Smith with King County Equity Now, Aaron Bryant with Village of Hope, as well as Tiffany Washington, the Deputy Mayor of the City of Seattle. So we have our facilitator, Trayana Holiday. She's going to take us through this panel. So I look forward to hearing.
Well, thank you so much, Buki. And you already know, much Garfield love in the building. I'm so honored to bring in all of these amazing panelists. Welcome, Amijah. Well, we're going to have them all at the same time. I think they're coming in now. But I'm so happy to be with y'all. Hi, Aaron. Hi, Amijah.
Hey, Queen.
Yes. How are y'all doing? I'll start with you, Amijah.
I'm blessed. So I'm blessed and excited to be here, particularly to be on this panel. And thank you so much, Mother Walden, for your legacy, for your work, for modeling for us how to be great out here as Black women. Thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. Aaron, how are you, sis?
Queen, I am doing well. Thank you so much. And I appreciate Reverend Walden as well, and also just being in this space.
Welcome. Oh my goodness. Welcome. How are you? I'm glad we're getting our panelists in there. All right, you're up next. How are you today?
Hi, I'm good. Good to see you all and just happy to be here. I wasn't ready quite when the camera, I was like, oh, happy to be here, y'all.
Hi, Cece.
This live technology, it has us all. Well, you know, I'm excited for this, you guys, because when they told me about this segment, it just filled me with joy. I mean, here we are during Women's History Month, and it is important to uplift the beauty and brilliance. And I think for me, so much of it is about the nurturing of how Black women show up in space. So I'm going to start off with these questions here that we have for you guys. I want to talk about I want you guys to really talk about what it is that you're dreaming when we think about community safety, when we think about a regional approach. Aaron, if you don't mind, I'll start with you.
Thank you. Can you hear me okay?
Yeah.
All right. You asked the question, what am I dreaming? And one of the things that I wrote down a few things. I'm a mom, a wife and a mom of 3 boys, 10, 7, and 4. And what I'm dreaming for them is, entrepreneurship, liberation, ownership, and really love for themselves and love for their people. Really, really just that simple. Black love, Black liberation, Black ownership, and Black entrepreneurship.
Oh man, Aaron, I can't agree with you more. I mean, I think that when we think about the legacy, so much of it is embedded in what you just said there. Miss Elijah Smith, how are you? And I'm so glad you're here. Look, I get excited. How are you thinking about the dreaming factors when we talk about a regional approach to community safety?
I dream about, and I've dreamed about this a long time, to be honest, where when I think about Black community, but all communities, but we can go into your own community. I can find the mother of the community, the community queen of the community, and go there to resolve the conflict. Because we know once the systems get involved, it just throws everything off for us and we don't quite move in our rhythm and in alignment that we normally would move in. When you're harnessed in your community. So I dream about that. I dream about, what I actually see and grew up with, I want to see it again, where, there's the grandma or the auntie in the community sitting on the porch or talking to the kids and educating us and making sure we are safe, making sure we are at the places we're supposed to be. But I dream it. I want to see it because it's just embraced with love. When you hear it, it's about love that's embedded in there. And I want to see the resources in our community that can create that, support that, and sustain that type of reality. I had an opportunity to have some of that as a child growing up in the central area, mainly segregated, but there was a sense of just love. And when something was happening, we talked as families and we worked that out. And the accountability fell on me as a young person to say, my family wouldn't like that. Or someone would say, do I need to talk to your mom? Do I need to talk to your auntie? Those basic things mean a whole lot and go a long way. But as soon as the police get involved, which I'm not saying police, but I don't want to even center this around police because we understand that that's a factor for people to feel safe, but it wasn't a factor for me to feel safe. A factor to me is when I looked over and I seen someone in my community that either gave me the look or I could go there for safety to know that I was okay if I'm lost or if I'm too far, if I needed to make a phone call. So that's what I'm dreaming about. I'm dreaming about being that person, being that community queen, making sure that in my community, the young people see me and know that I'm safe and then I can make a connection in a way that's not trying to tear down their family, separate them, or take anything away from them. Thank
Oh
you.
man, Elijah, I agree with you 100%. And you know what? Honestly, what I heard so much in what you were talking about there is really foundational around relationships. We talk about this all the time, but I think that you're so right in what you just said. And it's also bringing that back, that sense of community that is built on being able to check the next generation for them to have that sense of respect as they look to those who have been paving the way. So thank you so much. What a great answer. And see, artists, you may have a really unique perspective. I know you work with the Satterberg Foundation, and I want to hear from you. It's like, what are you dreaming about right now when we talk about a regional approach to community safety?
Yeah, thank you for that question. I think the number one thing that I'm dreaming about is honestly the return of our resources. We need repairs. Repairs need to be made, and we need to be restored, and then we need to heal. And I think once we can get to that point, then we can almost have, like, I feel like it's a luxury for us to dream. Right. There's so many other things that needs to happen so that we can actually dream the world and the space that we need to be in. And I think working in philanthropy really clarifies that for me, particularly around reparations and the return of the resources, because that's our money. And because of the laws and policies in place, because of genocide on indigenous folks and stolen land, and then free labor on the backs of Black bodies, we have to rectify that, and we need our money returned to us to uphold the community organizations in the way that only we can hold them. We know what our community needs. Trust us. Return the resources to us so that we can do it. And I think so that we can build everything for ourselves. And I think some of the other things that come along with that, when I think about dreaming or, having the space to even dream, is even thinking about gentrification and displacement. Like, if we're constantly moving around, we're always going to have a threat around our safety and our body and our beings. Like, where is our space and place? And I think just like as Amaya just said, like when we grew up in the Central District, in the community, it was like everyone knew everybody, and everybody would get at you if you got out of line. It didn't have to be your mom, your dad, or your grandma. If somebody saw me down the street acting a fool, I already knew somebody was going to come for me, and they were going to call my family on me pretty quickly. And that's really hard to do when we're all spread throughout the county, throughout the state, because of the displacement that's happened. And if we can get the city, the state, the philanthropy, everybody to step in and do what it is they're supposed to be doing and upholding and building in community, that will allow us the energy and the space to reimagine I'm trying to use good language here and not cuss. So, but I think that will allow us the space and the energy to really dream and reimagine what we want for ourselves. We don't need anybody else to do it. We don't need anybody else to figure it out. We got the solutions, and just run our money, and then we can get
coins.
the stuff that we need for ours, and liberation and healing will come after that.
Yeah, C Artist, you are so right about this. I mean, we talk about this all the time with regard to the fact that we do have the solutions, and ultimately it's just give us what we need so that we can make things happen. You're also really talking about self-resilience, us being reliant on self and really digging deep, because our people have always had the solutions, and really we need the space in order to make them happen. So thank you so much for that. Davida, I'm so glad you are here. Black Women's Coalition, please let me hear your thoughts on this around what is it you're dreaming about right now with regard to a regional approach to community safety?
I'm dreaming of, really honestly, when I think about a world that's where young people are unharmed from violence and free from incarceration. That's a world that I envision for young people, is where they don't have to worry about being harmed. They can be in places where they are safe. My mentor, Dr. Marshall, he always talks about, the Declaration of Independence guarantees us life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. And he says you can't pursue happiness if you're dead or in prison. And so my vision is to see young people where they are living in a world that, where their peers are not harming them. As a mother, I worry about my child walking out the door, being harmed by the police, and I also worry about them being harmed by their own peers. But I envision that world where that doesn't happen to them when they are safe. And then also where their neighborhoods are not over-policed, where they're not harassed, and that they're able to thrive and to be healthy. They're not perceived as bad kids, but that they're able to recover. And for the young people who have a world where they are prevented from even going down that path in the first place, so that they're able to thrive, they're able to be well. There's another quote that I love saying is, people are talking about public safety, and I always say, as long as I'm well, you don't have to worry about your safety. So a place where young people are healthy, where they're whole, and where they're unharmed from violence and they're free from incarceration. That's what I dream of.
Oh, I love that. And I think so much of what we talk about, honestly, is this kind of interdisciplinary approach. And that's really what I'm excited so much about with regard to this regional approach to community safety. I think when all of us are really looking at treating the whole person, right? So much of what you just described there reminds me of that, because when people are well, they're not committing crimes. When people have livable wage incomes and can take care of their families, they're not looking at other measures that can result oftentimes in gun violence or other things like that. So what an amazing panel we have. And I see we have Miss Tiffany Washington, Deputy Director of the City of Seattle. Miss Deputy Mayor, that's right. Thank you, Omari. Deputy Mayor of the City of Seattle. You are here with a unique perspective as well, as you bring your lived experience into your work. And Ms. Washington, I want to ask you, what is it you're dreaming about as we talk about a regional approach to community safety?
Thank you for having me. It was a struggle to get in, but I'm here. When you say, what am I dreaming about when we're talking about a regional approach to gang violence or gun violence? I think that what I imagine are community providers that work together to focus on young people, not in competition, where everyone is secure and clear on what they're providing and bringing to the table, and that we can all work together to make sure that young people are safe.
Yes, I agree with you 100%. And so many of us, I know we're all in agreement there. I'm excited about this next question because it starts to get down to the meat of things. There's a lot of different initiatives and measures happening right now currently. And I want to begin to ask you guys how you feel about some of the current measures that are taking place that give you some hope in the area of community safety. And Ms. Davita Briscoe, I'll start with you.
Piece working with Derek Wheeler and Willard Jimerson and Renegades for Life, Choose 180, the whole approach that has come together regionally, collaborative approach, again, where Ms. Tiffany was talking about that we're not in competition. This is the first time that I've been in a space like this where we're all on one accord, and it's a collaborative effort, and that we all are doing this through a public health approach. So this is the first time I've been on a team that's working collaboratively this way, and I have so much hope. I can't even imagine. It's like every time I look forward to these meetings, you know how some meetings you just dread, but these are meetings where I actually look forward to being a part of this team and a part of this collaborative approach that's approaching violence in a different way than what we've done before. And so, yeah, I'm really happy to be a part of this team. And we've been working for months to build out this model. And I'm really excited and looking forward to seeing how we're going to change our communities. And most of the time, we spent so much time focusing on structural racism and what we don't want. It's time for us to be able to build what we do want, and putting in place restorative approaches, putting in place all of those service providers who have been doing the work for some number of years and are able to come together looking at violence through a public health approach. I'm really excited.
Yeah, I think we share in your excitement and your sentiment there. Agree 100%. Ms. Erin, from the Village of Hope, tell us a little bit about some of the current measures that are taking place that give you hope in the space of community safety.
Thank you. One of the things that when Ms. DeVita was just talking made me think about was Brother Kente Perry, Dr. Gary Kente Perry. And one of the things he asked us is, what would the world look like and be like if racism was undone? And so some of the ways that we go about addressing that is we are strengthening intergenerational relationships, healing intergenerational trauma, addressing the internalized racial inferiority within ourselves, learning about history, teaching our babies about our history, really teaching them to have a strong sense of self and identity, really centering the genius of our children, our babies, and our elders in our community, really equipping our families and children to thrive in the face of all of that, and really nurturing a vision of the world we want to see and that we actually want to create. So I appreciate us really centering and being real about what's real, but also not staying there and stagnating our growth, because we have so much to give and so much to contribute. And we are doing that. And we're doing it in a non-competitive way. I see it every single day. Our community working together at the Holgate Street Church of Christ, supporting our young people with their education, working online, and the Village of Hope, really supporting that work, and so many other organizations. And so I just really, I too agree around one of the principles that guide even, my union, my marriage, is we are not a competition. We are working in collaboration to really enhance the work.
Yeah, absolutely. I love what you just highlighted there, because oftentimes what is highlighted most often is the fact of the competition. So I love when we can highlight collaboration as a real measure to bring about community safety in a way that is going to be holistic for our community. So thank you so much for that. I'm going to go right to Miss Tiffany Washington, Deputy Mayor of the City of Seattle. What are some of the things that are taking place currently that really give you hope when we talk about community safety from a regional perspective?
What I was just pondering on when everyone else was talking was the fact that we're calling it, that we're acknowledging that it needs a public health approach. For so many years, I mean, you know, I'm a baby of the crack era, and Black women were demonized during the crack era, put in prison, children were taken away, and it was a crime. And it wasn't until drug addiction started to hit the suburbs and the single working white mothers that it became a disease. And now we're full into the opioid crisis, and everybody's calling it a disease, and that it needs to be healed, and it's a sickness. And so for me, Davida and I were talking about this a couple of weeks ago. Dr. Marshall talking about violence as a public health issue that's both identifiable, treatable, and preventable. And so for me to call it, for us to now be talking about it from a public health approach is so important, because absent that, they talk about our young Black and brown boys and girls as criminals, when really the only reason why a young person, or anybody in that matter, would have a gun in their hand and harm somebody else is oftentimes because something was done to them or they've been harmed themselves. And so these young people need to be, it needs to be identified, it needs to be treated, and it needs to be prevented. So that is the thing that makes me the most excited right now.
Awesome. I love that. Identify, treat it, and prevent it. Absolutely. And, you know, I love hearing what all of you are talking about, because, again, I think that we can't do it from one perspective or one side. That's why I love how this entire approach is saying it's not about one organization or one person. It really is about the community and everybody bringing their pieces to the puzzle. I'm going to go right to you, Ms. Ciartis. You know, you were talking so much about the resources and giving us the resources. What are some of the current measures that are happening right now that you're aware of that really give you hope in terms of this community safety approach from a regional lookout, a regional perspective?
I think it's a lot of what we saw just over, I mean, the last couple of years, I feel like in the region, there's been a lot of building as far as coalition building, communities coming together and coming up with solutions on their own. And I think that's, again, I feel like that's the thing that we need to see, and really showing up in spaces that can shift that narrative of the competition piece or the scarcity mindset that I think white folks like to put on communities of color. And, you know, and sometimes I look at it, and because I'll have people asking me as a funder, oh, well, how come these folks aren't getting along, or what's going on there? And I'm like, you talk to your sister all the time? I don't talk to my sister all the time. I talk to her on Saturday, and then I don't like her on Thursday. I mean, we're family, right? Like, this is family, but at the end of the day, we know we're going to ride for each other. And I think that's the way that we show up. So just really shifting that narrative from that side and not even worrying about that. And then how do we get everything together internally within our own spaces? And I think the coalition spaces that I've seen, like with Community Passageways, Choose 180, how creative justice is showing up in the space, Africa Town. I mean, there's so much synergy right now, and I feel like this is a time that we're not going to get back. And right now is where we can really build out the models that we want to see. We can reimagine all of this stuff and dismantle it. But like this time, I don't live in Seattle right now. I live in Detroit, but I still work in Seattle. And I'm like, damn, could we have seen this stuff before? Because it was, they're just the coalition and the even just the energy to want to collective build together. I think we were missing that. And I think, again, displacement has a lot to do with that. If we all live in Kent, Puyallup, a couple of us in Seattle, and then Renton, you know, just all over, how can we get together and reconnect and kind of build the space? And I feel like now, as more and more folks are really taking lived experience into perspective, it's a qualitative data, and more of us are moving in all these different areas. we're speaking truth to power when we're in those rooms. I mean, I think when Tiffany talked about, like, before, you know, no one cared about when it was like our Black mothers, aunts, our uncles, our dads were struggling with crack and opioid addiction. Nobody said a damn thing. You know, it was like, oh, well, these are criminals, or you know, all of these other things. And then as soon as white kids get hooked on the same stuff, it's all of a sudden it's a crisis. We have to do something. And I'm like, my mom been struggling for years and wasn't nobody showing up for us. You know, she was categorized as this kind of person, not as a woman, not as a mother who just happened to struggle with addiction. So I just feel like the more and more different us as people are into these different spaces to bring the truth to the table in every room we're in, then it'll start to shift this entire narrative. But I think the collective energy, the coalition building, and coming to this with the spirit of abundance, because I do feel like we're in these conversations now around the return of resources, and we have to just be very clear on our message that we want repairs, restoration, and healing, and justice and liberation, and keep speaking that same thing until they get us our money, and we will solve, you know, we'll solve our own stuff within ourselves. It's kind of, we're not going to do all this in mixed company. We got it. Just, and it's not even giving us the money. That's ours.
Yeah.
Just run it back to us.
Yeah. I mean, I love what you just said too, and uplifting the spirit of the times right now, really showcasing so much around this kind of collective and coalition and ecosystem model where we all are able to bring our brilliance to bear. I appreciate that so much. And I love your term of run it back, right? I mean, so many times the ways that resources are looked at as, you know, oh, well, you know, why should they be given this? And why should they be given that? The data has shown it time and time again. And so many of us are in that work and we know what it is. Lastly, I'm going to go to Imijah. Before we go to break, Imijah, you know, tell us what is happening right now in the current ecosystem, in the current ecosphere that really brings hope for you when we're talking about community safety approaches.
What really brings hope for me is the fact that we are owning, Black community, we are owning in other communities, we are owning the narrative around our experience, and we are coming together. And I really, this Women History Month, but Black women, this panel is great. We're coming together. Like Davita has her group, the Black Women's Coalition. I'm working with the Community Queens Collective. Have an understanding that women of African descent are the keepers of this nation, and we really hold it down. And so I think it's up to us to really make sure that we stay strong together. Because what's happening, the dynamic is still playing out, these attacks, right? And these systems might be coming together, but that money, like artist, I call her Cece, said, we got to get our money. We run us back our money so we could do this in a more efficient and rapid way, because we're doing it constantly. But I appreciate that we are calling it out and we are owning our own narrative. And we are defining our own advocacy. I think that that's what's making the difference. I appreciate that it's being talked about as a public health issue. It truly is. That's not new. But I don't like the way resources try to put us in boxes and say, oh, we're going to deal with this as public health here, and we're going to deal with this as housing here. No, it's our full ecosystem. And I do believe as keepers of nations, as Black women, we hold it down. And as long as we keep talking to each other, as long as we keep being clear and solid with each other, and holding each other down and supporting each other, we're going to push and we're going to get through this. That's the hope that I have.
Absolutely. I agree with all of you 100%. And I can't thank y'all enough for bringing your brilliance to bear today for the audience, and really just having an open conversation about what it's going to take for us to see safety in the ways that we all have imagined, in the ways that we're all working towards. Thank you all for participating today. You guys stay tuned. We're going to be right back.
I did it for the city, I did it for the love, I did it for the people, I did it for us. Back on this rap ish, I ain't even broke a sweat, homie, this practice. Pondering my next move, staring at my track list, hope I ain't missed my window. Praying like a Baptist, Seattle's own, tired of this Game of Thrones. They made a list of the best rappers and guess who wasn't on? While the disrespect continues, I'm steady packing these venues.
Welcome back. Thank y'all for joining us. Thank you for those leaders, those Black women leaders who gave us their thoughts and impart some wisdom to us as we go forward. Derek, any thoughts that you have from that last panel?
Nah, man, nothing more than just Black women are the soul, man, the heart and soul, literally, man, of of this country, and such a high level of regard for them. It just makes me think about all of the movements, even the Montgomery bus boycott, right, where the credit goes to Martin Luther King, but Mary Joanne Robinson and a plethora of other incredible Black women were the ones who were facilitating and leading all of that work. And all MLK did was show up on the scene and say, hey, run that same playback, because they had tried to run the bus boycott before and it didn't work, right? But the way the story's told, right, because of patriarchy and the social construction of masculinity, they don't get that credit. And so, man, we're just trying to balance out that masculine and feminine energy because we need each other. We all got to work collectively together. And man, I got great energy just from listening to those beautiful Black women articulate so well the challenges and opportunities that we have in coming together to address these issues around gun violence.
So again, we thank Cece, we thank Tiffany, Deputy Mayor Washington from the city of Seattle. We thank Imijah, we thank Aaron, we thank Davida for your brilliance and just bringing this to the space. So now I want to get into another conversation that we're going to have around education. So if we can tee up our facilitator, Tally Hairston, as well as bring back Sister Imijah, as well as Sister Cece. And we'll also have Dr. Brent Jones, who will be joining us, who is the interim superintendent of Seattle Public Schools. So Tally, will you facilitate us in this conversation around the importance of education within how we want to address gun violence as a regional approach?
Hey, good to be with you. Good to be with everybody tonight. I feel like it's a family conversation for sure. Born and raised in the Rainier Valley, in the Rainier Beach community, children raised in the Seattle Public Schools and made it through. And so today we have with us just another part of this conversation, this collective consciousness that we're trying to build and weave together and in many ways recover. And so with us today, Sister Imijah, how are you?
I'm wonderfully blessed. Thank you.
Yeah. Good to be with you. Good to be with you. And I'll start us off this way, having done work together before in education, you are, you represent, to me, I may have said this to you before, you represent what it means to be an educational advocate from the bottom up, from the ground up, right? You are a grass tops, though we say grassroots, but you're the grass tops kind of educational advocate in our community. You represent many women, Black women, and women of color who are doing this work. Help me understand what you see as an educational advocate's role in addressing the work to eliminate this disease of racism in our community that oftentimes leads to learned violence.
Thank you for the compliment. I say I'm a grass tops maybe now, but definitely grassroots, you know. I'm a mother with children I'm a product of public schools, Seattle Public Schools, and definitely a mother with children in Seattle Public Schools, 2 young, beautiful, intelligent Black boys. You know, we're navigating that. And so ultimately, I believe the role as an education advocate is to really help us navigate through the education system as it's currently set. And as it's currently set, it miseducates us, right? It knocks our children's spirits. It does a whole lot of harm. It really does. Although it is a pathway for opportunity. So such a catch-22. So as an education advocate, and particularly for Black mothers like myself in that system, we have to now help navigate our children through to keep them as whole as possible, supporting their identity, their brilliance, that spirit that's going to keep them whole, and holding on to the joy of just being a child and the love of learning. That is our core. I think as Black women, is also being keepers of nations and taking care of our village. We need to make sure all the children around us are doing well. So although I'm there in spaces and I've learned to be at policy tables, I need to be mindful that all the children are doing well, because when other children are not doing well, they're causing harm in other spaces. And then as an adult in these spaces, as an advocate, is my job to hold our adults accountable. And as we're trying to transform this system to be a system where our children are welcome, they're getting an excellent education, and that they're coming out better than when they came in. And that this also to help people understand that we are the first teachers, we are the educators, and that education is our responsibility. So it's up to us to advocate for what we deserve and what our children deserve. So that's what I believe. And in order to do that, you got to show up at the school. You got to network with the person there who you believe is going to have keep eyes on your child. And you also want to be at the policy tables to bring in your lived experience to say, this policy is going to work this way or it's not going to work. So there's multiple things that go with it, and you got to be ready. And I'm happy to support anybody who wants to work with me to strengthen their advocacy. Thank you.
Well, and you mentioned something there that, probably somewhere between Mercer Middle School and, a policy table, we've run into each other and talked about not just nurturing our students' spirits, but how we can be about being our children's first educator. And what does that mean for Black parents in terms of showing up at a PTSA meeting, taking leadership in the schools, and what that does to our children? What are you seeing as kind of transformational that's happening now that you said maybe wasn't happening a few years ago, but with our current movement is an advocacy and resilience, we're bouncing back in ways that maybe you're seeing that people may not be seeing who are listening in right now?
What I find is that we're dealing with systems, and all these systems, schools, PTSAs, what have you, they're kind of set in I'm going to be honest, white culture, right? And so white culture works for mainly for that group. It doesn't work for our group. We are very much centered on relationships. So we do have a history in PTSA, and Sabrina Burr, I got to give her the credit. She brings that to the forefront of Black women and other women who brought that into reality, right? Advocating for children and families. So when you bring in history is important, but we also have to help people understand, like, although this is a great opportunity to connect and get involved in the school, what is the purpose of those type of leadership roles and opportunities? So bringing in your lived experience, bringing in partnership, and bringing in the fact that it has to be transformed. I'm not coming in here to sit and allow myself as a family to be abused by a system that is oppressing me, but I am here to transform it and say we could work together in solidarity for the best of all our children. Thank you.
See, and in part, this is what's brilliant. I think education can be like a hammer that harms or something that builds. But oftentimes education, right, has pulled us it's pulled us farther away. It's kind of isolated and made it hard to connect for us. And maybe since we have Sister Cece here with us still, maybe she can also chime into this as we wait for Brent to come on, Dr. Brent Jones. I would love to hear how you have learned, Sister Cece, about how people are stepping forward to bring education out of the distant halls, of higher ed or of learning, period, and really, how do we move closer to it?
Yeah, I think just as Amijah was saying, really trying to bring the lived experience into the space, because oftentimes people haven't valued the lived experience. And I'm someone that grew up between the Central District, like from the Valley to Rainier and Henderson. Like I lived in Lakeshore Village in 86, 87 to 88. So
Lakeshore.
is Seward Park Estates now, or
that's right. That's right.
Lake Washington, something, I don't know. But
back when it was the Ville.
The Ville.
That's where I grew up, and I just remember and went through Seattle public schools, and I didn't have, like, my parents weren't up at the school advocating for me. And at first I didn't really understand why that was. And even when I went to Garfield, I remember my math teacher was like, you should be in the other math class because you're talking too much in here and you're bothering everybody and you're giving everybody the answer so that then they can talk to you too. And he's like, we're going to put you in this advanced class. And I was like, I'm not going to the white side of the school. I don't know nobody over there. I was like, no, I'm not going. I'll be quiet. And I remember they were like, well, why didn't your mom come up here and make you switch classes? And I'm like, because my mom is a product of these same schools and these same systems. She's already gone through her own trauma. She's not trying to do it again. And the same thing with my dad went through Seattle public schools. So they're not trying to put themselves in those spaces again. And then as an adult, I have 3 kids. I have a 28-year-old, a 19-year-old, and a 14-year-old. And my oldest graduated from Rainier Beach in 2010. And I just remember, I'm going to show up in any space, but I think because I had practice of advocating for myself as a kid, because my parents just weren't able to, and then advocating for not just my kid, but for all of our kids. Because the thing that we're finding is that there's just all these things we didn't know, like to go through the school system. And then I remember looking up like the Washington State's graduation requirements, and then also looking up what it takes to get into college and what kind of district is setting you up for failure like this, right? And they know it. It's like the state requirements, and I think they've since shifted, but I remember the state requirements to get your high school diploma was not what you needed to get into college. So you can think you're on track, getting your 20 credits, and then you graduate, and then you try to go to college, and you have to take all of these remedial classes because you didn't know you needed 3 years of math. Or, it was like, I think I took 1.5 years of math in high school, and that was enough to graduate. And I went to college, to South Seattle Community College when I was 28. And I thought, I did algebra, that's enough, right? And they're like, no, there's like 5 more things after algebra. And I'm like,
right.
Man, I'm old. I don't know how to navigate this. So I think some of the things that, especially having the PTA and then other community organizations that have started to show up in schools in maybe the last 10 or 15 years, where the school has actually given them space in the building and MOUs to access records and things like that to really support students and families, so that where my mom didn't feel comfortable coming up, but maybe she would have felt comfortable if she knew 5 of her girlfriends were going to come up too, and we're going to be there. And then we can all go up there and get at this teacher for what they're doing to our kids. But she didn't know how to do that on her own. And it seems like now there's just more space to build capacity in all of us to learn how to navigate these systems for our kids.
Wow. Well, thank you so much for both of your work and your continued wisdom to this collective consciousness and narrative. We continue to try and weave based on our own agency and not someone else's identity in this. Brother Buki, Brother Derek, what I'm hearing is there's a lot of brilliance and capacity that we already have to solve our own problems and integrate education into this, right, collaborative approach. Right? Collaboration doesn't mean consensus, but it does mean cooperation. You feel me?
Yeah. I appreciate the facilitation, Tally. Thank you, Amija. Thank you, Steve C, for joining us for this educational conversation. For those viewers that are watching, this is the first of many, right? We're not looking to end this conversation as we talk about this community well-being plan and approach as we address gun violence as a go-first strategy. But until then, we're going to go ahead and go to a break, and we'll come back with our next panel on health and human services.
homie, this practice. Pondering my next move. Staring at my track list. Hope I ain't missing my window. Praying like a Baptist. Seattle's own. Tired of this Game of Thrones. They made a list of the best rappers, and guess who wasn't on? While the disrespect continues, I'm steady packing these venues.
Welcome back to a community conversation that we're having around a regional approach to gun violence. So we're looking forward to just continue the conversation, engaging. We brought Triana back in. We're now going to shift into the Health and Human Services panel discussion. I want to welcome our guest of honor that will come in and speak specifically to this, Pastor Clarence Presley with Resident Global Missions. We also have Pastor Lawrence Bowles with Redeemed Life. And we also have with us Tally Hairston, who will be facilitating this conversation as well. I believe we're going to try to get Dr. Brent Jones to join us. We're just having some difficulties getting him in, but Tally, go ahead and take this away.
Yeah, it's good to be with everybody again into this family conversation. Welcome back, Triana, with your wisdom and insight and lived experience, and Pastor Clarence and Pastor Bowles. Good to be with you all. Pastor Bowles, I'll start with you in leading into this conversation about community-led work and what's happening in terms of this being a collaborative work in the area of Kent where you are. What are you seeing that's really transformative that you want to share with the community tonight?
I want to first begin by saying I'm well appreciative to all of the panelists. I have been tuned in to everything that has been said, and to Dr. Presley. Greetings to you, my friend, and to Buki. Thank you for this privilege and opportunity. One of the things that I have really noticed here in the city of Kent is the fact that it is definitely the largest or the sixth largest city in Washington, which to me has it, and it has a population of 133 plus thousand residents there. And so definitely it is a task. But I've noticed that one of the things that has helped us with is partnership. I'm no one's enemy. And with my background, it's definitely fair to say that I can have, a anger towards the police system and et cetera. But I've learned how to actually partner with all of the leaders there to come with a solution. And I think that's one of the most important things in this work is having a solution,
right?
And knowing actually having the experience to where you can offer a solution. And I think that's what really helped me there in the city of Kent, is being able to offer a solution to the city of Kent and really maximizing my efforts and really carrying it out and building relationships. And one of the things that I've learned is being more involved in the community. I mean, hands down, not necessarily just talking about it, but I've learned that the most important thing that's complemented our work is to just be about it.
Right.
And we have been really doing is really being about it, doing community events, sitting down with the chief of police and the mayor, finding out what are the real statistics of this great city, so that we can try to bring our expertise to the table and literally roll up our sleeves and make the work really happen. Because even for myself, that was one of my challenges, is that, there was a lack of involvement. So I think that's one of the number one things that's helped our program, is the real involvement, the tangible involvement.
Thank you. That's powerful, because Sister Triana, when we talk about health and human services, as Sister Cece said, they need to run us our money, right? There needs to be this funding that supports the work, because it is our money. Our ancestors have earned it. It's not entitled to us. It's earned already. How have you seen that health and human services and that kind of advocacy that is needed to really transform health and human services for our community, whether it's housing or the arts or however you have stepped into that space?
Thank you so much, Tally. I think when I think about this, it really is a multi-pronged approach, right? At Africatown Community Land Trust, it really is focused on how do we not only disrupt gentrification, but then begin to really take ownership of the land, taking it back into our hands. When we think about the history of the city of Seattle and the amazing Black developers who were once here, ensuring that they created a space for themselves. They were redlined into the central district. There were other policies that made sure that, hey, we couldn't buy property everywhere. And so bringing our families here from the South and other parts of the country was really an element that I believe Africatown Community Land Trust stands on. And so I've seen it from that perspective where, you have to be able to engage the community. I think so much of this with regard to housing and even the arts, we have to see ourselves as a part of the solution. That's first and foremost. When we start thinking that, we can take a step back, we're going to allow the elected officials, we're going to allow the executive directors of these organizations or nonprofits, we're going to allow staff that works over here, staff that works over there to handle it. It really takes a lot of the decision making outside of yourself. And I think that what we really need to do right now is include ourselves as a part of the decision making, include ourselves as a part of the solution. Disrupting racism everywhere we see it, whether that's on your job, whether that's in a sector like housing or education or the arts, whether that's at your child's school, really taking it to a personal level. And I think that that's what, other organizations I work with, Africatown, King County Equity Now, it's about engaging the people so that, again, we build that powerful collective voice, because it's really through people power that we get anything done in this regard. When we're talking about innovative solutions, new measures, bringing in different models from other cities, or looking at that Sankofa model of looking back, knowing how to move forward, right? So much of it has been through the collective people power. And I think ultimately in any sector, when we're talking about human services, health and wellness, education, housing, all of those measures really need to come from a collective people voice. And that's what I'm excited to see. That's some of the things that I've been able to be a part of, participate, leading, being led by, and being led by elders and others in community. But those are the kind of measures that really get me excited when I think about how we innovate and how we bring people into this work.
Wow, because that's so key to what we're seeing. Being a part of the core team conversations and being a part of community conversations, Pastor Clarence, what Sister Triana is speaking to in terms of this whole community effort, I want to ask you about addressing the whole person, right? And oftentimes in our community, we don't get the whole person addressed.
Yeah, exactly. I believe that we operate quite a bit with a lot of dualism, in many of the ways that we function. And I think you're right, the whole person approach. And I think Mother Harriet from earlier in the beginning, she spoke to that, even connecting the spiritual, as well as all the natural gifts and the resources that are available. When I think about what Sister just shared, which was brilliant, that we have to begin to take inventory of our greatest resource, which is human resources, and one of the things that I oftentimes try to share with folks in our community is to dig deep and to understand that there is no monopoly, on new ideas. And I think we've lived within limitations. We restrict ourselves oftentimes because of the systems have impeded, obviously these restrictions, but we buy into them. And so being able to really focus on community development through personal development, I think if we're going to touch the community, we have to also pay attention to people specifically and deal with personal development to help people reach their full potential when it comes to entrepreneurship, creating, leveraging new business models, and just being able to, again, live into the space where we are and believe it. One of the most fascinating thoughts to me is, getting people to believe that they have something to offer. And we know that we are rich. We have a rich resource. And when you're talking about the collective of all the people that I've heard on here, I'm excited just to hear such wisdom and all the gifts from educational system to, just to people that are advocating collectively. And even as Dr. Bowles was sharing, being able to partner and realizing that we're not in competition with one another, but that we have so much strength and there's so much treasure, as I consider, the gifts of Black and brown community. And that's the way that I see it, the gifts of Black and brown community, and when you take a look historically, right, and you look at the Greenwoods in Tulsa, you look at the Rosewoods, you look at the Bronzevilles, you look at the Harlem, those folks collectively came together and they gave themselves permission to dream, and it impacted the entire nation, the world for that matter. So those are some of the thoughts that I have as it comes to this holistic approach, without limitation, without hindering ourselves to think, don't allow others to categorize us and put us in a box. Even from the standpoint with us as a church, I'm always sharing that, listen, we're not just supposed to be here for some kind of Sunday gathering. We want to leverage our space for businesses to use our space throughout the week, so that we can have an impact in the South King County region. So those are the things that we want to see happen, and I'm looking forward to partnering with other folks like the folks that are on this panel to see more and more of the efforts that everyone is putting forth begin to make a major impact in our region.
That's what's up. And Pastor Bowles, when I say collaboration, because we do believe Darwin was wrong and competition is not the way we develop community, but rather collaboration is. How would you step in, or how do you imagine collaboration in the Black community? In fact, how are you living that out now? What's a word or two you could give young people who are listening, or folks who've given up on the community and broadly around this? What encouraging word would you leave with them about collaboration?
I think one of the number one things is what Dr. Presley said, is pay attention to the people. And at the end of the day, we can't be intimidated. I think a lot of organizations are very intimidated and territorial. And if we realize that this entire region belongs to us, I think we can accomplish a lot more. And I think that's one of our biggest issues, is that we like I said, we try to compete. And one thing that has helped me is I try to reach out to as many organizations as possible, because I know I don't have all the answers. I know I do not have the blueprint. But as far as the work that I do, and then partnering with another organization, trying to find out their strengths, I think that with all of us collaborating and coming together, I think it will really be more helpful. Again, and one of the caveats to what I do is I try not to win a battle. I try not to fight a battle that I know I can't win. And what I mean by that is, they say if you can't beat them, just join them. And so I try to join, all of our different political sectors. I try to be a part of what they're doing, to where I can have a voice in what they're doing. Because again, if we make enemies, our voice means nothing. And so I think as we collaborate, it's important that we really come to the table and dispel all of the actual rumors regarding the different, challenges that we have, and just really just come together and make it happen. Because that's kind of where I'm at. I believe in one can chase 1,000, but two can put 10,000 to flight, and we're better together. And so that's kind of where I look at it, is, again, for one, paying attention to the people. I think that's the key.
Yes.
That will build our actual resolve, is by paying attention to the people.
Well, Sister Trayana, one of the things that I'm hearing in all of your comments is having such a kind of a value for the other. And in many ways, right, racism and violence is the opposite of that. It teaches us to fear our brother and our sister, to devalue them, not to respect and honor the contribution they make. Some of the things that you've been leading, and when we hear you on the morning update show, you're trying to really preach that. I know you're not a pastor like all of us here are, but you're really trying to speak that message. What are some of the things that you would add to this conversation that leads us to kind of understand more about how we value each other?
Oh, that's so great, Tally, honestly. And thank you for recognizing, a thorough line in my messaging here on the Morning Update show. But, honestly, it is true. I always think about learning from history, and that Sankofa model is so important to me. And when I think about the ways that the first villages, the first civilizations were ever created, it really was about unity. Everybody understood what they were bringing to the table, and everybody had value, right? It wasn't one thing was more valuable than the other. Everybody understood a collective visioning, a collective model of how to get things done in a very efficient way. And I think that this entire regional approach to community safety, and the reason why so many of us are here today taking place of all these panels, is because we understand that. We understand that now more than ever, the system in and of itself has actually tried to ensure that there are wedges put in place to keep us at a competitive level, to keep us looking at each other and wondering, well, wait, I do that. You don't do that. Like, that's my lane. That's not your lane. And ultimately, that it doesn't result in any real wins for the community at the end of the day. So when we think about the ways to, again, build our own systems, regenerate our past brilliance that was there before us, our ancestors knew how to do this better than we're doing it today. And I think we have a real opportunity and a real responsibility to take that model onto ourselves right now. And so much of I love what these pastors are talking about today, because it is a mixture of really celebrating our spiritual selves, celebrating ourselves as divine beings, understanding that we really do have the opportunities to do what's right at every single crossroads that we face. And I think when we take that same model into our work, into these organizations, into this collective approach, that's when we're really going to start to see the real wins. And so I'm excited for that. I'm excited for the ways that we build together and the ways that we bring in that ancestral knowledge to the table, to the forefront, so that we can really be guided by, ancient laws that have guided our people to successful civilizations over the years and over the history. So that's really one of the things that really brings me so much hope in this now time and this ethos.
Well, it's amazing to see. Oh, great. We have Dr. Jones. It's amazing to see not only the brilliance on this panel, but the wisdom coming through the chats and the contributions coming in. Dr. Jones, good to have you, brother. Good to see you. Thank you for joining on. We really just have one very important question. We know you've been doing education for so many years. You've been a part of the community doing this work for so many years. We'd love to hear from you about how you are beginning to envision a new day for education, where it's not so far away from our people, but really up close, building the agency of our young people. What are you envisioning? What are you seeing from community?
Hey, family, good to see you. Sorry we had technical difficulties getting me on. Are you hearing me all right?
We hear you.
Fantastic. So one of the things that we need to start thinking about is not just having a deficit model for our children, but our children, our students to thrive. And one of the things that I talk about is really being Seattle ready, being global ready. And so I want our children to be competitive in their chosen field, self-actualize, have identity, safety, secure in who they are, and become great citizens. Our school systems need to be working on those fronts to really take advantage of community's knowledge and wisdom and center students' voices so that we know what we're doing and what we're offering to students and family is relevant and meaningful. So the new day, hopefully under my superintendency, is that we're going to center lived experiences of families and students. We're going to really take our cues from community leaders and trusted advocates so that we can make our systems work on behalf of our students in ways they haven't in the past. And that's going to require us to really look at structural dynamics. We've always looked at what were the symptoms, but let's get down to the root causes and figure out what do we really need to do? What kind of investments, targeted investments that we need to make? I heard Cece talking about that, recapturing our resources and targeting them to our children who our system hasn't worked for decades. So those are the type of things that I'd like to see happen over time. And I think those are some of the keys to really breaking this school to prison pipeline. Let's get out in front of some of these issues. And again, be led by community's wisdom and knowledge.
Dr. Jones, we want to thank you for joining us. We will have you stick around because we want you to join the next panel, which is our future that will be joining. I do want to thank Tally for facilitating this conversation. Thank you, Pastor Bowles. Thank you, Pastor Clarence. I also want to make sure I thank Trey for joining us as well here in studio. So let's go to a break, and when we come back, we'll be hearing from our future.
I did it for the city, I did it for the love, I did it for the people, I did it for us. Back on this rap ish, I ain't even broke a sweat, homie, this practice. Pondering my next move, staring at my track list, hope I ain't miss my window. Praying like a Baptist, Seattle's own, tired of this Game of Thrones. They made a list of the best rappers and guess who wasn't on? While the disrespect continues, I'm steady packing these venues.
Welcome back. Man, so much powerful stuff being articulated. And I really appreciate all of our panelists for really giving the community and giving people some news that they can use. One thing that really resonated with me was this idea, Buki, of like the intentionality around how can we do a better job of working together. And one of the things that we're looking at doing, or that we've done really, is look to fund organizations to actually participate in a collaborative. I think that needs to move us away from some of the individualism that I think is closely connected to RFPs, right? These requests for proposals that come out. And oftentimes there's not enough resources, and it creates this Hunger Games between community-based organizations, right, who are left to kind of fend and fight. And that's deeply rooted in individualism. And so the system is set up in a way that doesn't fund collective impact models. It doesn't fund place-based strategies. And what it does is it causes folks to show up in a way to feel pressure, to feel like they have to be the subject matter expert of all subject matter experts, right? And that does not bode well for what we need to be doing in terms of looking how we can collaborate and work together, and how resources can be leveraged for these place-based strategies and for collective impact models, where we're able to lean into our specific gifts and callings and to our organizational missions, but not have to fight for the scraps or crumbs that fall from the table. And so we're excited about the future and the ways that we're moving forward with just breaking some of these old cycles and looking at how we can norm and create new cycles.
Well, I basically what you're telling me is that we got to rid the forced collaboration model, right? Forcing these community-based organizations to come together off of a funding mechanism, right? And I think we talk about this often, and I think we have to begin to shift that mental model and begin to really align the resource. And I think that was a common theme we heard from the Black Women Leading panel. It's like, how do we get our money, right? How do we make sure we put the resources in the right places, in the right hands, that will continue to develop and enhance the work that really creates the safe, healthy, hopeful, and thriving communities themselves? With that, we're going to go ahead and move into the next panel. I think this is a dynamic panel that we're going to really hear about our future. We have Dr. Brent Jones with the Seattle Public Schools that'll be joining us. We have Deshaun Neighbors with the Deep Dive program. We also have an entrepreneur in Jamil Shabazz with J Styles Barbershop that will be joining us. And this conversation will be facilitated by Nikita Nikita. Nikita Oliver.
Nikita Oliver?
Nikita Oliver. I was stumbling and fumbling on my words. I apologize, Nikita. I was thinking another last name. But Nikita, go ahead and take us away as you lead this conversation around our future.
Peace and good evening, community. I'm so excited to share space with y'all to talk about our future, to build on all the conversations we heard that just, aligned us with thinking about historically where we're coming from, so we can talk about presently where we want to be moving forward with zero youth detention, ending violence in our communities, but more importantly, making sure that our young people and our families have exactly what is needed to meet our basic needs. I think Davita brought this up, that when I'm well, you don't have to worry about me. When I'm well cared for, healthy, housed, and well fed. And so my name is Nikita. I'm the executive director of Creative Justice, and I use they, them pronouns. I want to start first from a place of humanizing the conversation. And we have an incredible set of panelists. Can y'all share, just from your lived experience, where you live, what you do, why this is an important conversation for you, so we can ground in who we are? And I'm going to throw it to Deshaun first.
Can you hear me?
We can hear you.
Okay. Well, yeah, my name is Deshaun Neighbors. I am a deep dive ambassador for Community Passageways. I grew up in South Seattle, born and raised in Seattle my whole life. Seattle Public Schools, Rainier Beach High School, class of 2012. I've done everything up under the sun. I've been around everything there is to be around in that neighborhood, if you know about it. Lost a lot of friends, lost a lot of family members. Everything that we're talking about now is stuff that affected me coming up and everybody like me. So that's why I'm passionate about this work. It's really enticing to be able to be on both sides of this conversation. So that's me.
Jamil, I know that you're deeply rooted in community. You come from a family deeply rooted in community. You're building institutions to support and care for our community. What in your lived experience brings you to this work?
Growing up, I grew up in between the South End, Seattle, and the Central District, and being involved in community has given me a perspective of unity, has given me a perspective of collective work. And so growing up, my father's always told me that whatever you get involved in, you have to be a beacon of light in the community. You have to be a source of inspiration, source of motivation. And so, like owning a barbershop, I've had the opportunity to open up a barbershop in different locations, in different areas, and possibly where you might be able to make more money. But the importance of having something like a barbershop in the community where you can touch the individuals that you can relate to, where you can be a source of inspiration. This is what has driven me to continue to do this work from a business perspective, but also from a collective perspective in the community, dealing with different people and organizations.
Thank you, Jamil. I really appreciate that. And there's a thought you brought up in there we're going to come right back to. But Dr. Jones, for you, what personally in your spirit and your lived experience brings you to this work?
Grew up in Seattle. Grew up in the Mount Baker area. And I remember when Mother Walden was talking about how the community was so robust back in the day. We had so many elders, so many people encourage us to go into education. And they set the expectation really high for us as young people. The elders in the community set expectations for us. And we knew our path as young folks around what we need to do. And as I thought about my career, I started my career as a teacher. well, actually as an instructional assistant, then as a teacher. Then I went into the community college system. The community college system is fantastic because it gives many people a second opportunity to pursue higher education and to get the skills and the knowledge so that they can really move economically through economic mobility. And so I grew up as a son of a teacher as well. So I've been in education for almost 25 years in leadership positions and really trying to institutionalize equity and trying to create these pathways so that young folks can come through and really do what they need to do in order to have opportunities to thrive. So I've been in the game for a long time and really excited about creating pathways for young folks to really pursue their passions, be competitive in their chosen fields, and really make it happen.
Thank you so much. You know what I love about this panel is, we have 3 different areas of work and collaboration that are essential to building whole healthy communities: education, someone working on the front lines on direct supports and healing engagement with our young people, and then bringing business and building institutions within our communities that allow us to thrive. Jamil, you said being in the community so that you can touch the individuals of those lives that you can relate to. I think often what is missed when we do this work in a very institutionalized way is the importance of people who have the lived experience, being able to build with people that we can relate to, that we can hear from, that we can receive with, that we can build with. And when we think about the future we want to build, what are the things you see need to be built up now that actually meet the immediate needs of people, but also create an environment that young people can dream about our future?
Well, I come from the perspective of and listen, being a viewer, also being of the whole panel, tuning in with the common denominator out here. When we listened to our elders earlier, and we're talking about coming from the perspective of education and me doing the work that I do in business, and even specifically in barbershop. When you come get a haircut, you get a sense of confidence when you get a haircut. The more education, the more knowledge you have a sense of confidence. The more spirituality you have a sense of confidence. The more of a connection you have to your ancestors, to your elders, it gives you a sense of confidence. So I don't know if the question was, a physical, if you're asking me what physically needs to be built up, but when I look at what needs to be built up, I look at confidence needs to be built up. And so even from a physical standpoint, if you look at the community and you look at our youth, if they had a sense of connection, something they can relate to, growing up in the Rainier Valley in the Central District, CAY and Rainier Playfield, Rainier Beach Community Center, that gave me a sense of confidence because that was like my second home. So I had somewhere I can connect to. I had an outlet, an avenue. I mean, about 90% of this panel I know from community events, whether it's Kwanzaa at the bookstore or whether it's playing football and basketball at Rainier Playfield. And so the confidence, I believe, is what my work is dedicated to, even dealing with being a part of ADIA, African Descent Youth Affairs, where we go into high schools and we raise the level of education for the students who are failing in math and science and technology, giving them a sense of confidence where when they leave or go back home, they have a sense of pride and they have a connection to something and they feel like they can do something else in life. And I feel like that within itself helps to establish a community life. I heard somebody earlier say that we have to build up. I forget exactly what they said, but what I got from it was that we have to build up the pride. We have to continue to reinforce and reaffirm the positive things in our youth. So I'll leave it with that.
Yeah, and just Deshaun, you're on the front lines of this work of doing what Jamil is talking about, partnering with young people to build that self-confidence, to create spaces of healing and really create those spaces of connection. That's challenging work to do. You know, when we spoke earlier, we talked about how often we're trying to build things while the pipe that's flooding our communities is still actively flooding. From your perspective, what are the things that are missing as we build this future vision that we need to be able to do this work effectively?
I think the biggest thing is really just expanding it to its full potential. You know, the way that the system, their measures, they're clearly not working, and I know for sure that the measures that we take in this kind of work, they do work because they've worked for young men like me, and there's a million other men like me in my community. I didn't just come in as a worker for community passageways. I came in as a participant. So the people that we're talking about, you know, the youth that we're talking about in this community and going through all this danger in the society, that's me. So I know that this stuff works. It's worked for me, for sure, like 1,000%. I have a case that I'm fighting right now. And since I've been with this organization, you know, my life has took like a complete turn. Like I'm going in a whole different direction. And I feel like the detention didn't do that for me. Being in jail didn't do that for me. I got this kind of help when I was able to bail out and become a participant. This is what helped me. This is what made me turn my life around and be able to be here for my daughter and my family and get on the right track. You know, we go through a lot of generational trauma and things like that. So there's a lot of things that factor in us, you know, going off our path. But if we got somebody that can just pull us into that lane, you know what I'm saying, we won't need detention. And so I think, just like I said, just expanding on the organizations that we have in place, we're not going to be 100% because that's impossible. And the system's definitely not going to be 100%. So if we just expand it, we'll definitely get greater numbers.
And before we go to Dr. Jones, do you mind just sharing a little bit for folks listening about what were the elements of Deep Dive that helped bring you to the space that you're in now?
The biggest elements were all the other participants. You know, I either knew them from the neighborhood or knew of them, and vice versa. So seeing that it's a lot of other people like me, you know, you usually gravitate to what you know. And then also the ambassadors are also people that can relate to our situations. A lot of them, you know, they've been to prison and they've done a lot of time. So they've been through the same exact things that we're going through right now. So I'm more likely to listen to them than I am to somebody that, you know, they haven't had my certain lived experiences. Like I know that, you know, if you're certified in this type of thing, I know that you know what you're talking about, and I can trust your word because you've been through what I've been through. So, you know, I could take what you say more serious.
Dr. Jones, you know, like you have come up in this work of bringing community-based grassroots work into a space of being stabilized. When you hear what Jamil has been sharing about building community connections and develop confidence, and what Deshawn has said about we really just need to expand the in-community responses, what is our next step as we move forward in the future to actually stabilizing these opportunities, resourcing them well, and ensuring that our young people actually get equitable access to them?
So Jamil and Deshawn are folks we need to be listening to, and we have to create tables where they have a seat at the table so that we can get their brilliance and knowledge and really inform our systems from our budgets to how we allocate service, to where we put school buildings, to what curriculum we have. Their lived experiences are what's going to guide us as we move to a place where we're productive and we're responsive to the needs of community. One of the things that we haven't done really well over time, and most systems don't, is really have a real community engagement model, have a real authentic, bona fide community engagement model where we're sitting there with young people, multi-generational groups that have had lived experiences that we can learn from. And so it's not as complex to do it, but the concept is simple. We need to be able to defer to community as to where we need to go. And so we need to do that in a systemic way. We need to do that in a way that's welcoming. We need to do that in a way that's culturally responsive, so that when young folks come to our tables, they feel welcome, and they feel like they have caring adults around them that are really listening and are genuine about their experiences, so that we can, again, utilize their brilliance to make things better. But I think Jamil and Deshaun are the models of who we need to be listening to. All of our systems, from our criminal justice systems to our educational system, public health, all of them are that's where we really need to focus our energy.
Thank you so much, Joe. And I just want to emphasize also the importance of our work being well resourced. You know, for a lot of our nonprofit organizations and even our community businesses that are doing this work to build the future we want to see and to dismantle systems that have been stealing those futures from us, there's a struggle to be raising those dollars to do it, do the work, and do the healing work. And so, like Cece said in earlier parts of this conversation, we need y'all to give us the bag so we can do the work that we're purposed to do, we're already doing, and we're more than capable of doing well.
Nikita, thank you so much for facilitating this conversation. You said it best. We need that bag, simply put. Deshaun, we appreciate you giving your wisdom and your voice to it. Jamil, it's good to see you, brother, man. Thank you for joining. And Dr. Jones, we appreciate you, and we'll be seeing you around there at the schools. So let's go ahead and jump to break. But before we do that, we're going to go ahead and begin a conversation that really talks about what are our next steps and what is the Go First strategy currently in place that's going to see this work continue to manifest itself as we look to build the long-term structure to implement a safe, healthy, and hopeful and thriving community.
I did it for the city, I did it for the love, I did it for the people, I did it for us. Back on this rap ish, I ain't even broke a sweat, homie, this practice. Pondering my next move, staring at my track list, hope I ain't miss my window. Praying like a Baptist, Seattle's own, tired of this Game of Thrones. They made a list of the best rappers and guess who wasn't on? While the disrespect continues, I'm steady packing these venues.
Welcome back. Thank you so much for tuning into this important conversation. We're really holding this tension between what do we need to do to stop kids from dying tonight, while at the same time looking at how do we create equitable quality and quantity of life. And I think it's important to hold those two tensions because we need short-term strategies and we need long-term strategies. I think part of the challenges that we have within these systems are that they all run on these 3-year cycles, right? And so a lot of times it's hard for a school district to get momentum when the superintendent is changing every couple of years, right? And I think the same thing is true in terms of our investments. We have to make long-term investments. We can't just expect and ask folks, hey, we need you to solve gun violence and you got 12 months to do it. That's just not a realistic model. And so the opportunity to move away from that and to be more intentional with our investments is so crucial. I'm excited to have in space with me right now, my brother from another mother, Willard Jimerson. Where there's a will, there's definitely a way. And so glad to be able to bring Will into space. Willard works closely with Zero Youth Detention as a community facilitator and is really holding closely this work around this Go First strategy. You keep hearing us use this language around Go First strategy because we're saying that gun violence is the first strategy. It's the fastest way, right, that our kids are dying. And so we want to address that en route to looking at these other things that we want to be addressing. And so with that being said, I want to talk to you, Will, a little bit about this Go First strategy. And can you share a little bit about what some of these strategies are and what does intervention, prevention, and restoration look like?
Thank you, Derek. Just to educate folks, as you said, this is a way that young folks are dying real quick and real fast, but it's also preventative aspects in terms of gun violence. We can prevent the nature of people dying and young folks in particular. So when we're talking about IPR, it's really looking at it from a public health lens. Just like CPR is used to help to resuscitate, to revive life, the same thing we're doing in this Go First strategy is IPR, the intervention, the prevention, and the restoration. The intervention is working with those who are already in a high-risk category, those who are exposed to becoming either victims, perpetrators, or both to gun violence. And then the prevention piece is to work with the secondary layer of prevention, is working with like the younger siblings or those who are on the fringes of being exposed to becoming also a member of the high-risk population of young folks to gun violence. And the restorative piece is also for the families and also the young folks to be able to restore themselves through a culturally responsive and relevant lens to be able to, in a sense, to provide the treatment, the healing, and the ointment and the medication to be able to give them what they need to sustain and revive their lives.
Man, that sounds incredibly powerful. So what I hear you saying is we got a vaccine,
yes,
right, through a public health approach around how this needs to be addressed. The question is, right, can this vaccine be taken to the next level? And can we spread this vaccine? One of the things that's important that we know for scientists and folks who are engaged in this work is that proximity is baked into the science of their discipline, right? In developing a vaccine. And we know that there are lots of community scientists and a lot of best practices and strategies across the country that have been implemented, and many of which you were just speaking to right now. Could you talk a little bit about how many young people are we talking about ultimately trying to solve for when you talk about, let's say the targeted population of young people that we're talking about? And can you talk a little bit about, are there any hospital-based interventions that are wrapped into the work that's going on with the Go First strategy?
Yes. So to answer your first question, how many young folks in King County? We're doing a regional approach in this regard. So in King County, how many young folks do we have documented that's been exposed to high-risk violence such as gun victims, gunshot victims? And right now we have 150 young folks that has been reported through hospital calls, who have been visiting the hospitals. So we have a sense of urgency around this, and also looking at King County's prosecuting attorney's office list as we do in our collaboration. These are one of the expectations in terms of we work with the King County prosecutor's office only to look at the young folks that need the high level intervention that most law enforcement agencies only intervene if the young person is in trouble with the law. And so this is part of the reason why we work with the King County Prosecuting Attorney's Office, is because we intervene. They don't have to be in trouble, but their lives are at risk. And so there's 80 young folks who have been identified on this list through the SNA, which is a social network analysis, to say that when we responded to young folks who have been victims of gun violence, they may have been a witness. And with the SNA, the social network analysis is showing that those young folks who have been witnesses to gun violence, they either become a victim next week or the perpetrator in retaliation to maybe the person that had witnessed becoming a gunshot victim. So that's the only time the police can intervene. But for our specialists and those who are doing the work on the Go First strategy on the ground level, we intervene way before that. So it's 80 young folks on that list, and there's 150 who have been documented who have been gunshot victims in King County.
The intentionality around that and just actually knowing, right, the numbers that we're talking about actually makes being able to take this vaccine to the next level so possible and so doable. And so the investments to be able to solve for 150 young people, if we think about all of the people that are involved and all the hands on deck, if we can't come together collectively, right, to be able to support and figure out what we have to do to support 150 young people, then we should just shut up, close up shop, and go home, right? So I appreciate you naming that. The last question I want to ask you is, what will young people say about this project when it's not that it'll maybe necessarily ever be finished, but how do we know that we have succeeded and made a difference? What will young people say in that regard?
From our sit down talking to young folks and baking in their voice in this particular strategy. As you talked about in the community, there's a lot of community-based alternatives, a lot of community-based solutions around this. There's folks who've been having these conversations longer than a 3-year cycle because these things have been impacting and permeating their lives on so many different levels. So we bake into this process the voice of the young folks. So I want to raise that so people can understand it's not a bunch of individuals who at one particular time who may have been similarly situated as a young person that they're trying to extend a vaccination to, but we're making sure that it's not about them without them. So their voice is baked into this process. So I'm thankful for that question. And the things that we're getting back from folks like Deshaun Neighbors and others is that when we not only can reduce, but also eliminate gun violence. I know that's a tall task, and I understand that's a tall order, but that's something that we can do if the vaccination can spread much faster than the disease of violence. And that's what we're doing. And so a part of that vaccination is getting young folks like Deshaun Neighbors into the particular operation room after they went through their own IPR, their own resuscitation, and bringing that stuff forward. So when you say what's the miracle or what's the mountaintop, or when we have reached our destination, is when young Black and brown boys, for the most part, who are of the highest of this risk category, are receiving the treatment, receiving the vaccination that is needed in order to sustain their lives. And when they get that treatment and we see the elimination in gun violence as is a preventable cause, then we know that we have met our mark. And that's what Deshaun Neighbors and other young folks have baked into this process in terms of what is the best informed strategy around this process.
Yeah, that's beautifully said, Will. So this is really about how can we create and get to a point of herd immunity.
Yes.
In relationship to young Black and brown boys, where we can disrupt and interrupt this pipeline, and we're doing the work of moving upstream. And I love what you said about the intentionality of we're not tokenizing young people. We don't see young people as decoration within our organizations, but we believe that their voices and their experiences matter. And we want to be able to center those things in relationship to how we're building out what needs to be built out. So it's critical to have youth and adult partnerships. The other thing I think is important is we have a large regional youth advisory council. So there's going to be young people from all across the region collectively working together on policy agendas and supporting these different work groups. So appreciate you, Will. Folks can go to zyd.com, zeroyouthdetention.com, and there you can actually sign up to be involved and engaged in some of the important work that's happening on the ground, as well as some of the things that are moving forward. We're coming to a close on our time today. This has been such a riveting and powerful discussion. What I'm looking to do is I'm going to send you to a commercial break, and then we're going to come back, and Buki's going to join me, and we're going to wrap it up.
All right, welcome back. And we want to thank each and every one of our viewers for participating and joining us in this Learn conversation as we are really having this community town hall that speaks to regional community safety and well-being. We're appreciative of the time spent. I think you heard from an illustrious panel. I want to thank each and every one of our panel members. I also want to thank each and every facilitator that helped in contributing to this conversation. As we mentioned before, this is not the last conversation that we will have. We will continue to have this dialogue, but we also want to make sure that we ask the one miracle question. What does it feel like when we reach the top of that mountain, when we are further up to the new shore? When we arrive at this Zero Youth Detained and all young people are healthy, hopeful, safe, and thriving. So we're asking you to continue to just really look at and ask that one question to yourself, right? What does it look like? What does it feel like when we reach that mountaintop? So with that said, I want to just thank everyone, Dee. I want to thank you for sharing the space with me. And we're looking forward to really speaking to this question of at the heart of law and justice is where we actually see community transformation.
Yeah, absolutely. That's where we see community transformation. And when a community is well and when it's healthy, then you don't need, juvenile detentions and places to lock people up. You will need spaces to quarantine folks, but that's a conversation around how do we do that in ways that are humane, that are rehabilitative, and that are ultimately restorative, and moving away from some of the punitive models and approaches that we have historically taken. And so this is rooted in well-being. Again, feel free, make sure you go to zeroyouthdetention.com. There are forms and sheets there where you can engage and sign up to participate in these work groups that we've mentioned, education, workforce readiness and development, community safety, juvenile justice. There's the work around the CFJC, the Children's Family and Justice Center, the new detention center that's over on East Alder, and needing to repurpose that space. There are so many opportunities for people to get involved and to get plugged in to this ecosystem of social change. We need you. We cannot solve these issues that involve disparities without recognizing our interdependence across domains, across organizations, and across communities. And so this is really about us coming together collaboratively to work together. There are no heroes. We're only hosts, working together to bring the type of change and to create the kind of ecosystem that gets us to this place of well-being. So appreciate you joining us tonight. There will be a series of other conversations closely connected to what you experienced here tonight, where we're looking at continuing to build together and to come up with the kind of solutions, to come up with the kinds of vaccines that gets us to the kind of well-being that we know is possible. So thanks for tuning in.
Thank y'all. We ask you just to continue to be safe, healthy, hopeful, and thrive. Thank you, Converge Media, for hosting us.
I did it for the city, I did it for the love, I did it for the people, I did it for us. Back on this rap ish, I ain't even broke a sweat, homie, this practice. Pondering my next move, staring at my track list, hope I ain't missing my window. Praying like a Baptist, Seattle's own, tired of this Game of Thrones. They made a list of the best rappers and guess who wasn't on? While the disrespect continues, I'm steady packing these venues.